One more time. We are here on February 16th to debate the question. This House opposes the acceptance of Syrian refugees into the United States.
Mother Teresa once said, "You can do no great things, just little things with great love." This is the driving force behind the case on the government side. Now we understand the Messiah complex that the opposition wants us to be, feels on the United States side. We understand that they want us to try to solve the world problem and to take in all these refugees. But what we're going to tell you is that not only does this put our own citizens at risk, but it is not the most effective solution to the problem. Because of those reasons, we are proud to propose the resolution. What we're first going to do is we're going to go through some definitions. We're going to tell you how you should weigh this debate. We'll show you the model we are going to propose. We'll tell you about the current status quo, and then we will show you the points we have on our side as to why it is detrimental to bring Syrian refugees into the United States. But first, some definitions. We're defining this House logically as the U.S. federal government. And acceptance, we are going to say, is legally allowing Syrian refugees into the United States via the UN High Commission for Refugee Standard Process and under the Immigration Act, which would take in 10,800 Syrian refugees per year into the United States. With that, what we think it's important to weigh this debate on is that although we must look at the well-being of Syrians and the lives of these refugees, the penultimate thing we must take into account is the lives of American citizens. And we justify this with social contract theory. The way a country is founded is that people give to a country, and in return the country protects them. It's why we have taxes, it's why we give up certain liberties. If a country no longer protects those ideals, the entire basis of that country is flawed, and it can therefore no longer profit. We believe because of this, a country must take into account first its own citizens' lives, and that is what we think is the most important thing to weigh in this debate. So what are we going to do for them? What are we going to do for these Syrian refugees? We think that we must outright refuse Syrian refugees into the United States for the time being. If new research comes to light, yes, we can take that into account. But as of what we've seen in Europe, as of what we've seen in the rest of the world, this is not the best solution. We believe instead we should spend our time and our money giving humanitarian aid to people in these regions where famine is widespread, where, for example, it costs $100 for 1 pound of grain in Syria, where people literally die of starvation on a daily basis. We believe for the same amount of money as it costs to do one background check, we can help to feed thousands of families in Syria, and even taking into account corruption, a better solution. With that, we strongly propose, and we'll give some background on really what the vetting process entails, because we think this is going to be a point of clash before we do that.
Yeah, Assad has been using food aid to support people who support him and then take food away from people who don't support him. Isn't injecting more food aid into that region just going to give Assad more leverage to oppress people?
No, we don't think that's true at all. We think that the issue is that, yes, some food aid is corrupt, as it always happens in these areas. But we think that if we can keep giving the food aid, some will go into the right hands. And we do agree some will go to the hands of Bashar al-Assad, and we fight that harm because we still think the small amount we'll get to the people is much more significant than any benefit we can get on our side of the house. Now we'll go into what the vetting process is, because this is going to become a contentious issue, as we've seen in pop culture, right? So what does it entail? So if you're a refugee, you apply through the UN High Commission. If you're recommended to the United States, you go through DOD, DOHS, you go through all of these different background checks, and they see whether or not you're a good fit for the United States, if you're a safety risk. But the key point here to recognize is how are they getting this information? Because this is where you see the flaw. So the data is almost 100% obtained by SIGINT, or signal intelligence. This is data obtained by satellites and electronic monitoring. However, Asha Rangappa, from Associate Dean of the Yale Law School and a former FBI special agent, stated in 2016 that SIGINT was the major way that we were getting data from the refugees. Now, we are getting the data from SIGINT as opposed to human, which is human intelligence. Now, this poses a problem, because the only way Syrian refugees can basically prove that they're not terrorist affiliated is they don't have to text about it, or call about it, or talk about it near a phone. We think this is a problem because this does not give adequate actual measurements as to whether or not they're security risks. That is why Asha Rangappa, who is the Associate Dean at the Yale Law School and former FBI, stated in 2015 that we are more susceptible to more attacks like terrorists. Because if you have humans rather than just SIGINT, we are much more likely to actually weed out these type of criminals. So this leads us to the main arguments, right? So what's going to happen? We believe there's two main things that are going to happen when we let these refugees, especially because of these security risks. One is we put our citizens' lives at risk, and two, American Islamophobia will promote anti-Western ideas. The first is fairly obvious, and we're going to put our own citizens at risk. The first point is with terrorism. Now, although we don't believe terrorism is going to suddenly become rampant and we're all going to have these massive bombings, but without human, we do open ourselves up to attacks like we saw in Paris. There is a blatant flaw in the way that our vetting process is done, and it opens us up to attack. More importantly, though, is the violence we get, sorry, I have lots to go through, is the violence we are going to get from other instances besides terrorism. And this is what we've seen throughout Europe, where in Sweden, when 100% of sexual assaults were committed by refugees, where in Germany, on New Year's Eve alone, there were 900 cases of sexual assault committed by refugees. We've seen a stream of violence throughout Western Europe. German students who are white are now attacked when they are walking to school, and we see that we do not want to risk this violence being done to American citizens. We are not saying it necessarily will happen, but we're saying that it has happened in Western Europe, and we're not willing to risk it happening to US citizens. Well, with that, we move on to the next point, which is why American Islamophobia promotes anti-Western ideals. With this, we have 3 sub-points which I'll get to which I will say as I get to them. The first is we have the rise of radical right-wing parties. Already in America, we have very right-wing parties, right? Just look at the current Republican primaries, okay? We have Trump, Rubio, and Cruz, okay? It's not the most liberal place. But what we see is that by letting in refugees, this gets so much worse. Let's look at what's happened in Western Europe, okay? In Greece, racist groups have been so outraged that, first of all, the Finance Minister Yanis Varoufakis warned that Europe could be falling into a modern 1930s. There we see the fascist party, the Golden Dawn, is gaining support at a rate it never has. In Sweden, the far-right Swedish Democrats, which was a neo-Nazi party, is now got 1/5 of the electorate in the last election, okay? In addition to this, the Northern League in Italy, where Matteo Salvini has demanded that we raise Roma settlements where they have refugees, is now the second most popular party there. A party that's saying we should go and kill everyone in the refugee camps. The Freedom Party of Austria, with the leader Horst Hader, who was a suspected Nazi ties, is now the second most popular party there. Wow, I ran out of a lot of time for this case, so sorry about that. Okay, what you see is that we are having the spread of right-wing groups. And this is already a problem in the United States. We cannot let this happen even more. By bringing in refugees, we promote these anti-Western ideals, and this hurts not only Americans but them, and that is what my partner will show you in her speech. We strongly urge a vote for the government.
Okay, the chair will now recognize the leader of the opposition for a speech not to exceed 7 minutes in length.
Like millions of refugees fleeing the violence in Syria, Alan Kurdi's family only wanted security. They were so desperate to have a safer life that they tried crossing the Mediterranean Sea in an inflatable raft, hoping to reach Canada. Sadly, Alan, a 3-year-old Syrian child, his brother, and his mother joined thousands of other refugees not in liberty but in death by drowning on that dangerous voyage. The stories of innocent refugees like Alan's family are exactly why we, as the opposition, are proud to oppose this resolution. So we have 3 main reasons as to why we oppose. First of all, there is a moral responsibility. Second of all, there are economic benefits. And third, we have a solid vetting process. Rebuttal will be integrated into my arguments, and I will point out when that is happening. Now, going first into the moral responsibility we have. Under that, we have 2 subpoints, humanitarianism and categorical imperative. Going first into humanitarianism, which is this idea that all humans are basically equal and should be treated with respect and dignity. An analogy we can use for why the U.S. should take in Syrian refugees is that when a swimmer sees a drowning child, he has a moral duty to save that child just because he can. He cannot look around the pool to see whether the rescue would be less of a hassle to others, and he cannot justify letting that child drown on the grounds that he already saved another child the other day or something. As the United States has a burden to help Syrian refugees because other countries have already taken in many more refugees than they can handle, and the U.S., as a wealthy power, can handle much more refugees. Even if we only take in around 10,000 refugees, we can provide them with safer lives, and we have a moral obligation to do this. Furthermore, going into categorical imperative, which states that an action is moral in itself, and that the very act of humanitarian aid, the very act of letting refugees in so that they can lead better and safer lives is an end in itself. And as a moral argument, we have to pursue that end. We have to let in Syrian refugees, and we can also provide humanitarian aid to the region. We can also try to fight ISIS. These things are not mutually exclusive, but it is very beneficial to let in Syrian refugees, because going into my next argument about the economic benefits associated with this. So whenever refugees come into a country, whenever there are more workers, we see that just by increasing the market size, naturally that leads to more growth. In addition, many of these displaced refugees make great entrepreneurs. Albert Einstein was a refugee, George Soros was a refugee, and part of the reason why they were so successful is because when people are displaced and put into new environments, they come at this with a new mindset. They have a new way of thinking, and they are willing to take more risk.
Yes. Now, all of the examples you've given us are not in the current day situation, where we have the highest rates of unemployment we've had in a long time, where people in America already can't find jobs. We see that we're not going to have an increase in economic benefit, but we're just going to have more unemployment.
So that actually is rebutted by a point under the economic benefits argument, which is the theory of complementary task specialization. This states that whenever there is an increase in non-English speaking immigrants who specialize more in manual labor jobs, such as many Syrian refugees would, this actually pushes English-speaking Americans with a few other skills to get higher-paying communication jobs. For example, instead of dishwashers, they can now become waiters, while the Syrian refugees would take over these manual labor jobs, such as dishwashing. But we see this actually allows English-speaking Americans to take on other jobs, higher-paying jobs, such as being waiters, which the Syrians can later aspire to. Now, going more into the argument about the economic benefits, ultimately we see that while there might be some confusion in the short term, these are great long-term benefits, because all the long-term benefits we have seen from refugees are great from our country. We have seen the Vietnamese refugees assimilated well. And in addition, we would like to point out that under the model, under Obama's plan even, these refugees would be spread out over many states. They would not be focused in one area, and they would have many benefits and many opportunities to grow. Now, going then into our third contention, and also providing some rebuttal as to the vetting process involved. Now, as the government already explained, we actually do have quite a strict vetting process. It takes an average of 2 years for a refugee to be allowed to enter the United States, and if terrorists really wanted to exploit these routes, they would go get a visa or something that is easier to enter the United States with. In fact, all the examples provided by the government about terrorism and Islamophobia and various groups acting, those all fall because these were acts committed by nationals, not refugees. We see that refugees, as their main priority is to be safe, as I have already said. Safety is their main concern. They are not going to jeopardize their own safety to commit criminal acts that would get them deported. They know better than that. They know that by taking these huge risks and coming to the United States, they are not going to jeopardize their safety in the U.S. for committing petty crimes or anything like that. In fact, what we will see is that they will have jobs, is that they will be able to assimilate, is that they will be able to be beneficial and contributing members to American society. Going more into our vetting process then. We see that our vetting process has recently been strengthened, that it was strengthened over several years, and now that now we have health checks, we have background checks, and in rebuttal to the government's point about the vetting process not being secure enough, first of all, we do have databases, we do have information, we collect information when these refugees are in camps, we have months worth of extensive data gathering and information, and in addition to that, all these harms are outweighed by the humanitarianism arguments, by our moral obligation, and also the government has failed to cite any single example of a Syrian refugee in the United States who has committed any harms, who has committed any criminal acts, and that is because there are none. Because we have looked through media reports, and even now, there has not been a single report that says Syrian refugees have committed crimes in the United States. There are reports about visa holders committing crimes, about nationals committing crimes. However, Syrian refugees have not committed crimes because of the risk involved, because their main concern is their own safety. And for all these reasons, we are proud to oppose.
Thank you. Chair now recognizes the Deputy Leader of the government, for a speech not to exceed 7 minutes in length.
We outside Proposition continue to believe very strongly that we should not let the Syrian refugees in. My partner has already spoken to you about the harms to the US, which I'm going to elaborate on, and I'm going to show you also how it's bad for the refugees themselves to just adopt this plan randomly. But before I move on, I'm going to just refute a few things said by side opposition. So she came up here and she spoke about how people are dying because they're taking boats, and it's really sad and tragic. But here's the thing, even under the plan that you're proposing, we're going to be taking in a relatively small amount of people. These things are still going to happen, right? So you're not solving the harm that you're pointing out. Also, she came up here and spoke about humanitarianism and how we should help out if we can, which we outside Proposition have never argued with. What we're saying is our plan is more effective because our solution is better, and also because we can help more people, right? She also said that they're going to have safer lives if they come here, and I'm going to show you in my arguments why that isn't true. They also came up here and spoke about economic benefits, right? And we believe that these arguments are not specific to the refugees, and they're not really arguments for letting them in. Like, this is a general argument for immigration in general. Also, she came here and said that it's going to lead them to a better life and things like that, but at the same time, she wants them to stay like in manual labor jobs so that Americans can get better jobs. And so they basically end up getting stuck into like the bottom socioeconomic rung, right? She came up here and said that if ISIS wanted to like infiltrate into the US, they would get a student visa or something similar. And we say that isn't true, because ISIS has a vested interest in increasing Islamophobia within the US, because that feeds in directly into their propaganda. So that point doesn't stand. She came here and said that refugees would know better than to, basically her logic was that refugees would know better than to like get involved in petty crime and things like that. And you would think so. But given that we've seen instances of it in Europe, we know that that isn't really true, and also it's a risk we can't take, especially since my partner told you, and since they haven't really argued with or responded to, the only intelligence we have comes from SIGINT and not human intelligence. So we can't really risk those things, and we also believe the vetting point stands on our side of the house. Now, moving on to my argument proper, right? I'm going to show you how it's not in the best interest of the refugees for them to just come to the US without the proper at least in the current situation. Because along with harm to the citizens, it's also going to harm them. This is because, first of all, because of the cultural isolation that they're going to face and the increased risk of radicalization on their within that population. And second, because it's going to lead to scapegoating and polarization, right? First of all, talking about cultural isolation, think about the people who are coming here, right? And we also see that culturally, just because they reject ISIS, it doesn't mean that they're really going to accept liberal democracy. We see instances within Europe of not accepting equality of women, or not completely accepting LGBTQ rights, or coexistence with people of different religions. No, thank you. We also see within, like in Germany, instances of attacking Christians, Yazidis, people perceived as gay. So we see that just culturally, just because they reject ISIS, it's not an argument for them to completely fit in within the liberal democracy of the US. Now, why is this important? Because it's going to lead to further cultural isolation on their behalf. And though we're not saying that just because you're culturally isolated, you're just going to get radicalized, it does increase the chances.
Okay, see, given your entire speech about cultural isolation, right, it took the United States itself around 60 years to accept gay marriage as a normalized thing, right? Why don't you think that the Syrian refugees themselves would be able to accept it 60 years later, for that matter, even a few years later, if they're educated on the liberal values of the United States?
Okay, this comes to my second point, right? Because the more you don't fit in, the more it's going to be easy for people to scapegoat you, specifically within the US, right? Let's look at the current scenario. Like my partner said, we have people like Trump getting power, more increasingly conservative parties getting power, both in the US and over here. People who are resentful of the current status quo. And if you bring in refugees and you give them this, especially in a nation that has such rampant Islamophobia, if you bring in the refugees in this manner, it's just going to increase the anti-Islam, like the Islamophobic propaganda, and it's actually going to make things less safe for them. Because as we see in instances like in Canada, two Muslim refugees were attacked just because of the anti-Islamic sentiment. We see instances in Hungary and Germany of refugees getting attacked because of the polarization of society. Second, I'm going to show you why it's actually better for them, why our plan is better for them. Because we give them the money or the humanitarian aid they need to help them right where they are, right? Think about, we can help people both in Syria and we can help them when they're in nations like Jordan and Turkey, which actually are coping with quite a bit right now. So we can actually help them better in this way.
Yeah, see, given the fact that Turkey and Jordan are facing so many problems in handling these refugees, how do you think the humanitarian aid that the US gives is actually going to benefit them in any way, given the fact that they don't have proper infrastructure?
Yeah, no, it isn't actually just the infrastructure, it's resources, right, which the US can help provide. It's things like healthcare, it's things like food that they need to feed these refugees and the people who are coming in. Second, because not all of their problems are going to be like long-run problems that you can solve. These are time-sensitive. Like my partner came here and spoke to you, came here and told you, it costs $100 to get like a pound of grain in Syria, right? So these things are time-sensitive. They're starving. They need healthcare. And these sort of problems can be solved more immediately with money. They can't wait all the way until we get a vetting process. Third of all, it's better for them because we can help more of them. And this fits into their morality argument, right? We believe we can help more Syrians because, like the UN has said, it costs nearly 12 times as much to resettle them near...
She has a minute.
Resettle them within the Middle East rather than just bringing them here, right? So we can actually, instead of helping out 10,000 refugees, we can help 120,000 of them. And so we believe this is in their best interest, and this is actually the maximum, like, this is how we'll be able to do the most for them as a nation. So what have I shown you today? I've shown you how they haven't actually addressed any of our side's concerns about risk, about the vetting process, how they, on the moral side, we actually take the argument because we help more people and we help them more effectively. Also, the economic benefits that they brought about just aren't a valid argument for this. I have shown you how it's actually better for the refugees to help them resettle, better for the refugees if we help give them humanitarian aid, and it actually is harmful to them to come here in such a polarized society as it is in South Sudan. And therefore, I urge you to vote.
Chair now recognizes the deputy member of the opposition for a speech not to exceed 7 minutes in length.
Go ahead and give it a slap. Yeah. Don't be afraid, you won't scare me, I promise. At the point when my partner comes up here and tells you that there are Syrian refugees right now willing to risk death of their entire family and drowning at night because they want to escape the very high possibility of being blown to shreds. By the way, 400 have drowned just this year in the 2 months we've had. This side of the house over here thinks that it's a good idea to keep them away. In fact, they think that it's actually more harmful for them to come to the United States. They think it's more of a risk for them to be in the United States and have all these false harms that they give you than it is for them to be in Syria and be blown to 500 pieces. We think that's categorically wrong. We think that their side of the house sinks. And we're going to tell you why they get none of their benefits, none of their harms, and why at the end of the day, we win this debate. Sit down. First of all, let's talk about the refutation that I'm going to go into some constructive matter. I have 3 main points of refutation that are going to clash directly with everything they've said. Even though they've said that we've somehow failed to address their points, I'm going to make it very clear for you this time so that you know. First, this government aid plan, which is atrocious. Second, this unemployment line of economics, which you guys seem not to know what unemployment is in the United States, but I'll go ahead and clear that up for you. And 3, how it's not in the best interest of Syrian refugees. Maybe after my rebuttal. First, this aid plan. My partner's already told you that the way this works is when you drop aid into a war-torn area where, for example, the 3rd most populated city in Syria has been blown to smithereens and is unpopulated because everyone's dead or has moved out or risked dying, we think that it's actually not effective to go through the corruption that will inevitably happen, wherein 30% of the actual supplies and money you're donating actually reaches its intended population. And the fact that those people who actually want access to these supplies have to be dependent on warlords. At the point when in Syria, the Assad regime is shooting down civilians who are trying to get access to hospitals, we think that's atrocious on our side of the house. We don't think that sending them medical supplies is going to do anything to cure that. And at the end of the day, they have no infrastructure to actually keep these medical supplies, these food supplies that you are allegedly going to give them, right? So 1, you have no access. 2, you have no infrastructure. And 3, the majority of your supplies are not getting to anyone. And the only way they do get to people is if they're dependent upon warlords who are going to create anti-West sentiment. Sit down. I told you after rebuttal, if you stand up again, I won't get you for the rest of the round. 2, talk about how you guys seem to think that somehow the unemployment rate in the United States is at the highest it's been for a while. Let me educate you. In 2007, unemployment was at 10%. In 2012, unemployment was at 8%. And here in 2016, unemployment is at 4.9%. There's been a steady decrease in unemployment. And the fact of the matter is we do see economic benefits. Austria has had a 0.7% increase or decrease in unemployment since they've accepted refugees. We see that, as my partners laid out this contingent for you very clearly, and somehow you don't see a clash, maybe you weren't paying attention. At the end of the day, we see that there is economic benefits. Any type of economic harm you guys are going to claim are actually wrong. Any type of economic benefits you're claiming for keeping refugees out are going to turn to us. Because what we see is that we grow the economy through increasing the labor force, we create more access to these jobs for these people, and because these people have been replaced and have been granted education to the economy, they have greater access to these jobs. Let's get into the third point of rebuttal. Not in their best interest. I kind of gave you a preview to how ridiculous this is, so I'm going to try not to spend too much time for it. The fact of the matter is, these people in Syria right now are under threat of being killed. They're under threat of their families being killed, and they don't know where to go. So they make makeshift rafts, they sail out into the Mediterranean in hopes that they hit some type of land and someone will allow them to live there. We, as the United States, think that we should use our legal authority and our cap, as your plan set up, by the way, that's not necessarily our plan, that's your plan, because you set it up, that allows 10,800 people into the United States per year. The status quo is that we allow 2,200 people roughly into the United States per year under the same vetting process. Show me where a Syrian has blown up a building. Show me where a U.S. citizen has been killed because of a Syrian refugee. You can't, because it hasn't happened. We've been doing this since 2007. Your plan doesn't work. Your economics argument fails. And Syrians are much better off when they come to the United States. Let's get into my constructive matter. I have 2 pieces for you today. First, I'll take your POI.
Yeah, so they just want to tell you we're not going to help anyone. Don't listen to his anger. Okay, here's the thing. If only 30% is getting to them, it costs $200,000 to vet one Syrian refugee. 30% of that is $60,000. That's 600 pounds of grain. I don't care if 70% is being taken away. We are feeding 600 families with 1 pound. That is better than vetting 1 person in 2 years.
Okay, so show me where you take the helicopter and just drop 600 pounds of grain over Syria, and then show me the infrastructure you get them the citizens, show me the citizens that are eating that, and then show me how citizens are willing to stay in Syria, risk death, and eat that grain over what they're doing now and what they've been doing for the last 2 years to risk their death, risk their family's life to sail across the Mediterranean. It's just unpractical. It's not going to happen. And even if you do that, you deliver that aid, it's going to get to the wrong people. So stop trying to bring that up. Again, back to my constructive. 1, we're going to see that it destroys cultural barriers, and 2, we're going to see that the U.S. is significantly different from Europe. So any harms they're going to bring you from European examples, you can go ahead and throw those out the window because they're trash. So first of all, how it destroys cultural barriers. We see that when we have Islamophobia in this country, such as when there are Muslim folks who attend Trump rallies and they're kicked around, we think that's bad. We think that type of culture is perpetuated by views that we get over here on their side of the house. We think that on our side of the house, what we get is a culture where people are willing to assimilate, where people are willing to be understanding of other people's views, and because of that, we actually have less of these conflicts. We see that if you're only letting in 10,800 people a year, you're able to do what we've done in the past as the United States, where you're not taking 10,000 people, putting them in one camp that's set up with tents next to a highway where they commit crime and they don't know because they have no jobs. What we're doing is we're assimilating them and dispersing them throughout our entire country, which is massive, may I add. And those people are going to be put in states like Montana and Missouri, like we did with the Iraqi refugees, like we've been doing with the Syrian refugees, where in states and in places within states, even there's places in New Jersey wherein people actually have 1, access to good class mobility, 2, access to be able to get an economic job, and 3, the ability to make sure that they're not going to defer to crime. What we see in on their side of the house is that they simply perpetuate this hate. They simply think that, if we just deny them out and we throw money at the problem will go away. Can you name one time ever in the history of our country where throwing money at a problem actually did and provided the solvency you wanted? No, you can't. That's why their side of the house is going to fall. My second and last point of constructive matter is how the U.S. is different. When we look at how Europe is set up and they're taking in hundreds of thousands of refugees, which we may actually want to be doing because it's closer. 1, they have smaller geographical regions. 2, when they take in refugees, because they're taking in so many so quickly, they set them up in generally like refugee camps wherein there is high ethnic fractionalization because you're not actually assimilating them into your society, which is where you run into all these harms. In the United States, I've already shown you that that's not going to be the case, that hasn't been the case, and it will be the case, right? And because of that, we don't get their harms, we don't have the numbers they're letting in, and at the end of the day, it's not only better for the United States and it's better for our economy, it's better for the refugees because they're not being blown to smithereens, and we win principally and morally. And for those reasons, reasons. There is no reason why you want to accept their aid package. You want to negate this resolution, and it's already an opposition ballot. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Chair now recognizes it's time for the back half to speak. Chair will now recognize the leader of the back half for a speech not to exceed 7 minutes in length.
Mr. Speaker, the systematic disenfranchisement of marginalized communities in the United States is indicative enough of why Syrian refugees should not be taken into the country, right? You see it with blacks, you see it with Latinos, you see it with races in this country that have fallen so far low in the social ladder, right, that they're unable to climb back out. And that's what we want to bring to you on closing government. Before I get into that, I want to come out here and sort of refute the main ideas that have been brought up by side opening opposition that we think are fundamentally problematic in the way that they've been laid out, right? The first is this idea from Madeline that goes unrefuted about moral responsibility, right? She brings up this point about how if you're swimming and someone is drowning next to you, you have to help them out. Yes, we accept that, but moral responsibility only exists in two cases, right? One is when it does not cause harm to you, and we believe that by taking Syrian refugees, you are essentially harming yourself. Moral responsibility cannot exist insofar as you have to bear the brunt of the problem, right? But moreover, and this is more important, there's a distinction between causal responsibility and moral responsibility, right? One in which you're just, you're assumed responsible just because you are a part of the causal chain, right? That would be the case with the U.S. Sit down, with the U.S. In this whole Syria situation, right? We think that just because they went in there, right, they established their own government in Iraq, did not mean that they were looking for, what happened in Syria to then take place, right? They were not expecting this power vacuum in Syria to occur, right? So we see that being a part of the causal chain doesn't grant you moral responsibility that they so claim. Secondly, right, they talk about economic benefits, right, to the country. This is said from the perspective that you're going to make Syrian refugees indentured labor in your country, right? We think that's fundamentally problematic. When you say that we're going to make them take the lowest paying jobs in our countries, all you're doing is reinforcing the problems that opening government has brought to you in the debate so far, right? Moreover, they talk about how employment in this country is in a good place, right, and whatnot. But we think that that's problematic, right, because these statistics are skewed. You need to look at the employment versus the entire population ratio, right? Because when you're looking at unemployment, all you focus on is the people who are actively seeking work. We think that that does not take into account the other people in the society, right? So when you look at the employment to the population ratio in the US, that ratio is extremely low. Then Jared tries to bring to you this point about how they're going to destroy cultural barriers, right? They're going to disperse them, and therefore the situation is going to be really good. We think that's problematic because that fosters that happens under the assumption that these people assimilate, right? That happens under the assumption that these people are best able to interact with others around them, right? That only happens when they decide to get rid of their own ideals, right? We see that's probably not going to happen, as has been the case with other immigrants that have come into this country, right? All we see is that it's likely to foster xenophobia throughout the country. We think that their model is problematic. But I want to talk about three things in my speech. One, the role of a government to its people. The second is the current social situation in the US and why this is not conducive to taking in Syrian refugees. And the third is on this idea of an inclusive economy versus an extractive economy, and how even though the United States would be considered inclusive, it is really not for people of this race. But before I go on, I'll take you, Jared.
Yeah, so we don't have to show that things are going to be really, really good. We just have to show that they're better than people dying. We have to show that they're better than people being blown to 500 bits and their homes being crushed. You don't provide any analysis as to why they're better off.
We think that's extremely incorrect, right? We're looking at whether or not you should take them in here, right? We are willing to accept that there are better solutions, and we are hoping that those solutions do take place. We're going to show you why taking them into the United States, which is our burden, is a bad idea. Moving on to my first point, which is the role of a government to its people. Mr. Speaker, when a government gets elected, right, when these people are chosen to represent popular opinion by the people who have voted them in, you see that they're required, right, they're mandated by the fact that this is a democracy to have to satisfy the people's opinions, right, the opinions of which they have been, sought to maintain. Right? We see that when large swaths of people in the country, right, estimates are about 67% believe in not accepting Syrian refugees, right, believe in not taking in Syrian refugees, and it's not just xenophobic people who believe that, right, mind you, it's people who believe that it's not really going to be conducive to the environment in the United States. We see that as a government, you have to respect that opinion, right, because if you do not, right, if you are in that position of empowerment with that mandate and you go about not accepting it, there are going to be three consequences. One, you're not representing people's views, but more importantly, you're going to foster discontent among the people. This ties into the impacts that opening government touched on, right, which is on how you impact extremism in the country, how you impact Islamophobia. We say that because a government is not fulfilling its objectives, that's going to be even worse, right? That's going to be like further exaggerated in this situation. But why this is so important, and this is what I really want to stress in my speech, is because you need to factor in the current social situation in the US. As I specifically brought out to you before, right, we see that the manner in which minorities are treated in this country is shameful, right? The manner in which they're like systematically oppressed, they're like in this position from which they cannot get back out, right? Essentially shows you that structural asymmetries that exist, right, in this country are essentially not conducive to having these people come up the social ladder, right? We see it with blacks and Latinos, right? But the big problem is this, right? When these people come in here and they're somehow made to believe that they are inferior, right? Because of a lack of economic capital, because of a lack of social capital, because of a lack of cultural capital, and that they're not going to be able to fit in. We see that they're going to internalize these ideas that they're somehow inferior, right? We think that that's more important than them having to face the brunt of what people say to them, right? Because when they believe in themselves that their views are somehow considered bad, right? That their views are somehow lesser than those of other people, we say that it's problematic. We do not want them to internalize the racial stratification that has like occurred in the United States, right? We think that it's better if they stay in that like Middle Eastern area, right? Be it like they go to other countries, be it that they get humanitarian aid and Syria gets better. We think that they're likely to better foster an environment in which they can propagate their own opinions. But that brings me to my third point, right, which is on this idea of how essentially what they're proposing on their side is that America is this inclusive economy, right? That because you're taking in these people, they're going to somehow have a better lives. And I'll agree with that, right? America, yeah, sure, it is supposed to be conducive to innovation, right? You have good laws that foster like businesses. You have like ways in which people are best allowed to express what they want to, right? But and like it's definitely not extractive, right? It's not a place where you have poor like ways in which the economy can grow. But America is only inclusive if you have two things, and these are two things that the Syrian refugees do not have. One, the right race, and two, money. Right? We think that it's problematic when these people come into this country without ways in which they can foster the benefits that like everyone else can through these two factors, right? We see that like they come in with absolutely nothing, right? What does that mean? That means that they're going to fall into a place where they're even below the other social minorities in this country, right? Be it blacks, be it Latinos, they're going to fall even lower. Considering the state that Latinos currently face, right, being like at the bottom of the social ladder, as many would consider, right, we think that it's fundamentally problematic when these people come in with a lack of a college degree, right? They're unable to provide for their kids. They're unable to have a situation in which these people can go on and try to make their situation better. We think that for all these reasons, it's essentially fundamentally incorrect to allow this acceptance to happen in this country. So what have we shown you today, Mr. Speaker, on side government? We've shown you that it's not just the fact that these people are dying, right? It's not just about the fact that they need help. We agree that they need help, and we're willing to provide them that help. It's about which channel best provides them that help. And when we look at the effects on refugees, right? When we look at how you're not fulfilling the role of a government, the social situation in the US is not conducive to this environment, and that they do not have the right race or the right money to be productive in this environment. We do not want them to be indentured servants who serve here and then go back to their country, where we are proud to propose.
Okay. Chair will now hear a speech from the leader of the back half for a speech not to exceed 7 minutes in length.
Give me your tired, your poor, your huddled, I know you've heard this before, your huddled masses yearning to breathe free. What does this mean? It means that we don't care if someone is poor, we don't care if they are huddled masses, if they are tired, if they are not skilled. Our values of this country that are inscribed on the pedestal of our Statue of Liberty say that we are here to be the leader of the free world and to accept these people, right? This is in the national interest. What am I going to do in this speech? First, I'm going to do some refutation and build up what front half has given us a little bit. Then I'm going to get to my 3 points of constructive argumentation. Historical analysis of how we've done this before with even more groups of low-skilled refugees, and they've integrated quite nicely. Secondly, how that we need to counter the narrative of Daesh, aka ISIL, by accepting these people and not fostering anti-Western sentiment. And ultimately, the principle of the pottery barn rule, which is going to be my third constructive point. Why, on principle, we've heard the moral, on principle, why we should take these people, because we are actually involved in the causal chain of events that has led the mass emigration of refugees from Syria. First, some refutation. We think that when Varun starts off his speech out with a member of government and says that these people are too far down the social ladder for us to take them, that this is really harmful rhetoric, but is also not true, right? We think that we've done this before with refugees, and I'll get to that in my historical examples, right? Secondly, they say that moral responsibility doesn't matter, right? If you're going to face some sort of harm, and if you're not part of the causal chain, then you don't have any moral responsibility. Two responses. First of all, we don't face any harm, right? Jared comes up here and says, point to like one Syrian refugee. Even we've taken over 100,000 Iraqi refugees from a similarly destabilized area of the world. Show me one time in which they've led to the death of even one American. They can't do that on their side of the house. They're only stigmatizing them with this harmful rhetoric, right? And secondly, we are part of the causal chain. I'll get to that with my Pottery Barn analysis. So then they say that somehow by us having them take the lowest paying jobs here, that's bad. We say that's exponentially better for Syrian refugees and their families than living either in dilapidated refugee camps or being shelled to smithereens by the Assad regime. We also say that's better for Americans when Madeline gives you analysis of how people will be able to move up the chain when these people take lower paying jobs.
Yeah, now they want you to say you haven't hurt anyone in America, okay? But we don't want you to buy this, okay? Now let's look what's happened when you actually take in multiple Syrian refugees. Let's look at what's happened in Western Europe, where they completely ignore the precedent that has been set. They've had multiple people hurt. They've had hundreds of thousands of sexual assaults, of acts of violence committed against people in those countries by refugees. That is the tangible impact. That's what we're not willing to have.
All right. Okay, cool, right? So it's the same argument that, the United States is Europe, so we're going to see the same things as them. Look to the analysis Jared gives you of how we're not Europe. How he talks about the proximity, the geography. So Madeline talks about how our resettlement process is a lot different, but also numbers-wise, Europe has taken over 1 million refugees. We're taking 10,800 a year. It's far more manageable. The United States is not Europe. Don't buy into these harms that they tell you about. Now, let me just get to some constructive argumentation here. First, let's look at some historical examples, right? After the end of the Vietnam War, which the United States contributed to the destabilization of that country, we took in over 125,000 Vietnamese refugees. What were people in this country saying then? They were saying that these people were low-skilled, that they couldn't speak the language, that they would not be able to integrate. What did we see happen? We saw integration, we saw them learning the language, and we saw those benefits manifested even more intergenerationally in the next generation, right? Their posterity, when they are born, they can speak the language, they have access to public schools and social services, which they will not have otherwise. But it's not just Vietnamese refugees. We've taken over 1 million Cubans from a communist country, mind you, in which the sentiment in this country was even worse, that they were going to be communist agitators, right? They were going to be like spies for the Soviet Union. This didn't happen, and ultimately we have a lot of great Cuban businesses. Personally, I love Cuban food, and we might not have that if we didn't take Cuban refugees. Also, over 300,000 Soviet Jews after 1988, right? And these same arguments that are this harmful rhetoric that's coming out of the government side was said against them too, but they've been able to integrate and help our economy in a number of ways. So that's the historical analysis that I want to bring you, where we've done it before with even more people, and we've been able to integrate them, and there have been benefits. Now, let's look at principally the Pottery Barn rule. Why would you do this on principle, right? So this was a term coined by Secretary of Defense Colin Powell, who was actually responsible for the decisions made when we decided to enter Iraq and Afghanistan. And he said that, yes, we were responsible for the refugees that came out of that region. And so he coined this term. Why is it called the Pottery Barn Rule? Because if you break it, you buy it. What does that mean? It means that if you are the person who ended up breaking that thing or destabilizing it or even contributing it to it in any way, that then, therefore, you have some responsibility to take care of that problem. This is why we took over 100,000 Iraqi refugees, of which there have been no harms, right? But they don't want to acknowledge that example because it's inconvenient for them. So this is a humanitarian emergency of the highest order. The U.S. has to get involved. We have to do our part. It fulfills our nation's obligation, upholds the values of freedom and liberty, right? So now let's talk about why we need to counter this Daesh narrative. Look, the front half government tells us that the weighing criteria should be American lives only. First of all, we think that this is really ethnocentric and ultimately just not a good weighing mechanism. But secondly, even that if it is, we know that Daesh is telling people, look, the Americans do not want Muslims, they do not want Arabs, and if we say that now we're keeping you out of our country, that only propagates that narrative, right? They play on their propagandizing sites through social media. Governors from states like Indiana, like Mike Pence, saying that we will not take Syrian refugees. refugees, right? And so we think that's inherently harmful. When we counter that narrative and accept Syrian refugees and give them a quality of life that they deserve, ISIS will not be able to use that rhetoric, and people will not be able to be radicalized. So what have I shown you, right? Showing you that, first of all, we've done this before with hundreds of thousands more people than we're going to be seeing with Syrian refugees. But second, I've shown you that we have a principled responsibility to do this because we've contributed to the destabilization of that region. We don't have to agree whether it was Obama taking troops out of northern Iraq because he wanted to end the war, or George Bush going in there in the first place. But we can agree that the United States helped to destabilize part of that region, right? We've also showed you why we need to counter the narrative of Daesh, why they're capitalizing on the rhetoric that government team gives you, that Governors Mike Pence are giving you out of Indiana, and why we need to stop that. Look, the words on this pedestal of the Statue of Liberty were not meant to be from a time far, far ago. Those are supposed to be the principles that we represent. At the point that there are no harms that they can justify, and we say we need to uphold our principles as leader of the free world, we urge a vote for side opposition.
Thank you very much. Time now to hear the Deputy Government Whip, the final side of the government to persuade you that the acceptance of Syrian refugees into the United States is not a good idea. Begin, Mr. Whip.
I think on both sides we agree that there is a crisis, a humanitarian crisis in Syria, that people are dying. And yet it is quite strange that side opposition continues to use this moral messiah complex tactic of theirs to convince the audience that the most expensive, the least effective, and the strategy with the least solvency is better for the Syrians than the one presented by side government. We on side government have consistently shown to you how it is not only harmful to Syrian refugees when they arrive to the United States, but it's also harmful to a larger extent to the people of the United States who have been here for a while. And not only that, they keep raising this idea of how on the Statue of Liberty, on the pedestal, that we have this engraving, these few words that must be held sacrosanct in every context possible. That is simply not true. He himself says that these words were written a long time ago, and yes, they have to be conformed to those conditions that existed a long time ago. The economic and political climate of the United States today is vastly different from that which existed when the Statue of Liberty was in fact brought into this country. But before we move on to the key questions that need to be answered in order to assess whether side government has the ballot, I will move on to some refutation. So he claims that there have been historical examples, that we have had Vietnamese people, Cubans and whatnot, and because we've had them, they have somehow integrated, that we believe that the Syrian refugees have a chance as well. First of all, this idea of Vietnamese and Cuban people completely integrating into society is a sham, ladies and gentlemen. While a few of those people may have been able to ascend this ladder of economic stability, a large proportion of those people still today live in ghettos and slums where they cannot afford to live a better life than their parents did. This is not the type of economic climate that we on side government want to provide for the Syrian refugees. Moreover, there was a political incentive for America to accept those Cubans, to accept those Vietnamese, to ensure their anti-communist propaganda or anti-communist stance is fulfilled. But that political incentive today does not exist. And I will show to you why, and I'll show you how both teams of side government have already elaborated on that. And then he talks about this second generation idea, where even though these people cannot speak the language or of not the same race, that somehow, because in their second generation they'll be able to integrate into this culture, learn the language, they're better off. But they ignore the analysis that in Europe as well as in the United States, it is higher propensity for the second generation immigrant to become more radicalized when they're shunned from society. And that has been proven to you and demonstrated to you in examples not only from Europe but also in the United States. They claim that because you've settled Syrians you have been settling them for the past 5 or 6 years, and Iraqis for a little time before that, suddenly, and since no major incident has occurred, that the risk of this radicalization, the risk of such ghettoization does not exist. But we on side government believe that enough time has not passed for you to cast that judgment yet. Anyway, he keeps talking about this pottery barn rule and how there is a causal link, and therefore, because there's a causal link, the United States has to help these refugees. He never explains this causal link to you. All he says is that some rule of this nature exists, and because this rule exists, you have to help them. We on side government believe that that causal link is not as established as he thinks it is. Yes, the United States had invaded Iraq. Yes, the rise of ISIS is somehow linked to that. But that does not explain why the civil war that in fact led to this humanitarian crisis even started in Syria. That is not why the United States is suddenly responsible for the Syrian refugees. And we believe that that causal link is not present. But before and yes.
See, now I'll provide you a causal link there. The fact that the United States is supporting the Syrian rebels, that is even escalating the civil war in the Syrian region right now, don't you think that's a causal link enough for the US to accept Syrian refugees?
I don't think the support of the United States to any Syrian rebels has been proven effective at all. And I don't think that even led to the escalation of anything. The escalation of whatever has been happening is because of the entry of ISIS, it's because of Russia's support to Assad, and it's because of the Kurds attacking both of these forces in the north. It is not because of the US supporting any Syrian rebels. That escalation has not occurred. And lastly, ladies and gentlemen, he claims that there is some ISIS narrative. And we on side government believe that ISIS narrative exists, and that in fact acts to our favor. When the head of German intelligence claims that ISIS is actively trying to infiltrate refugee camps and refugee flows into Europe and into the United States to ensure that terrorists enter through that channel. Why through that channel? Because they specifically want to portray the United States as anti-Islamic, but most importantly anti-refugee. And that will only happen when they, even if the process takes 2 years, that will only happen when they enter through that process and still try to cause harm, still try to incite violence, and still try to inspire incidents such as that of Paris and of terrorism that has already occurred. So what are the key questions that need to be answered today? Which is the best solution, and which has been proven most effective for the Syrian refugees in this case? And number two, which solution is best for the United States and for its citizens? So which solution is better for the Syrian refugees, ladies and gentlemen? A solution where only 10,000 people are rescued from this horrible climate that they describe a year, where you spend more than $200,000 per refugee to vet them for over 2 years, while there are time-sensitive issues, as state government points to you, of hunger, of issues of healthcare and other such issues that exist in these refugee camps, that exist in Europe where these people have been resettled, where the United States, according to our plan, can in fact extend humanitarian aid and increase funding to those forces such as Peace Corps or Red Cross, which could actively enter these refugee camps and help these people in a much more efficient way than is possible when you bring them over to the United States. So, on side government, we believe that the most cost-effective and the most efficient solution is through our plan, not theirs. More importantly, ladies and gentlemen, which of these solutions is most better for the citizens of the United States itself? And my partner clearly talks to you about how the current situation in the United States, where you have actively disenfranchised minorities who cannot ascend this ladder, when you bring in Syrian refugees and when you ensure that they're indentured labor, how wage suppression occurs, how these minorities are further ghettoized, and how ultimately when you have the rise of xenophobic parties, the ideas that have been propagated by xenophobic elements within the society, we believe that you, on your side of the house, are trying to propagate them. With that, I rest my case. Thank you.
Thank you so much. It's now time to hear from the opposition whip for a speech not to exceed 7 minutes in length.
Ladies
ladies and gentlemen, it is quite shameful that the side government on themselves, they deny the fact that the US is capable of doing anything, right? The fact that they don't trust their own government, the fact that they don't trust their own system is quite shameful. My partner and the entire opening bench talked to you about why there's a historical precedent given the fact that we've taken in refugees, the fact that we've actually allowed them to assimilate within the US society, and the fact that they've actually been beneficial to the US economy as a whole, right? They completely negate these facts and just tell you that this hypothetical situation about how the Syrian refugees are actually going to pose some sort of hypothetical danger to the US people, right? Given the fact that we've taken similar people within that region with the same ethnic background or things like that, and we've not seen any sort of violence recently, they completely ignore that, and we think that that's completely shameful. But I'll go into further detail about this in my 3 key points of issues. Now, the 3 key points of issue that I'll bring to you today are, first, can the US be really compared to Europe? Second, how is the US society going to look in the future? And third, does the US have the moral responsibility towards the Syrian refugees? Right? Now, the first issue that I'm going to bring to you is that can the US be really compared to Europe? Now, the opening government was consistently talking about how, we'll face the similar consequences that Europe is facing, right? Given the sexual assault, given the rapes that are taking place. He also brings out the statistics of 100% rise of rape in Sweden, right? Although in sad opposition, we think that that's abhorrent. We see that that's, again, a flaw of the cultural assimilation that has not taken place within Europe. Mr. Speaker, we have to agree to the fact that, they have not been allowed to assimilate within the society of Europe as a whole. It's only been a few months for them in order by the time they come to Europe. And we see that that's not enough time for them to allow them to culturally assimilate and to allow them to get those liberal ideas, right? But before I move on, opening, go.
Yeah, okay. If the problem is that they are not culturally assimilated, so they're okay with committing horrible acts of sexual assault and violence, now that seems like a much deeper issue than a couple of cultural orientation classes where they learn the national anthem.
No, that's the problem that we have within the United States, right? We just see somehow that people are going to right away assimilate within the US society, right? We see that these people are in need for help. The fact that they need our assistance, the fact that they need in order to improve their lives. We see that they have this great need in them in order to improve their lives. We have to give them some time in order to culturally assimilate, right? Moreover, Mr. Speaker, when we see in Europe, we saw that hundreds and thousands of refugees came in Europe at one single go. Right? The United States does not have that problem at all. We have the advantage of the Atlantic as opposed to the Mediterranean Sea. We will not see the influx of hundreds of thousands of refugees banging on our border and saying, let us in. We will not be overwhelmed. We have the opportunity to pinpoint and choose exactly who we want to come up with. Right? The fact that we have the vetting process that takes around 2 years, we see that we have that advantage, and that's something they consistently ignore. Also on the fact that they believe that our vetting process is somehow not good enough, that we use this sort of intelligence, that it's not good enough, right? We see that that's actually a best way to monitor them. The fact that we're taking a long time to monitor them, the fact that we'll know how they would be within those camps, we see that that's good enough reason for them to come here, right? Moreover, when they come to the United States as refugees, right, we see we'll also be able to monitor them within the US borders itself, right? It's not that somehow they come into our borders and they're somehow, right, free of any sort of surveillance or any sort of that matter, right? We see that we'll still be able to track them and still be able to show their progress. Now, opening opposition talks to you how the US will be different as well, right? They talk to you about how, in a way, that it will be easier for the United States to, in a way, divert all these refugees into different states so that, they do not form any sort of ethnic enclaves in one particular state, that they are spread out. We see that that's actually beneficial. The fact that these people will be separated across the United States is actually going to be much more constructive in how we deal with them, in how we help them educate about what the liberal values of the United States are, right? We see that that's another advantage that the US has over Europe, especially the fact that they were not able to, in a way, pinpoint and choose the locations of these Syrian refugees. We see that the US will not be similar to Europe in that aspect. Go.
Okay. All 3 speakers before you and you have brought up this issue of morality, right? On the issue of morality, it is your burden to prove how you help the most number of Syrians, not 10,500 per year, but all those hundreds of thousands who are in Europe or in refugee camps right now.
I'll get that into my third point of issue. Now, moving on to my second point of issue of how is the US society exactly going to look, right? Now, the closing talks here about this structural asymmetries, that they're going to be, in a way, ostracized by the society just because that they're different. The fact that they accept that the US is Islamophobic is, again, extremely shameful, right? My partner
partner brings to you this point about Latinos in the first place, right? We've seen the Latinos actually merge within the US society. The fact that most of them are employed within the state of California shows that they are willing to go and achieve that success, to rise above their socioeconomic ladders, right? The fact that Latinos have integrated well, the fact that first generation college goers are actually coming to college and getting education in order to rise with the socioeconomic status, we think that the Syrian refugees will also be willing to do the same thing, right? We can't just say that just because they have these values or ideals of the Muslim ideals that they're somehow not going to integrate, right? And the fact that, again, we have this option of choosing where to exactly place them, right? If we place them in Islamophobe states in itself for that matter, right, we see that that's going to be harmful for them. But the US has the advantage of placing them in societies where people are much more culturally accepting as opposed to states that are not as much as culturally accepting, right? Moreover, my partner brings you this historical analysis of how we've dealt with the Vietnamese, right? The fact that we still had that political discourse during that point, the fact that we were afraid of communists from the Vietnam, or for that matter, even from the Cubans, we see that these people who are of the low socioeconomic backgrounds have integrated well within the US economy and have actually been beneficial for the US economy as a thing. No, thank you. Moreover, we see that there's actually an economic benefit for them given the fact that they've actually not taken jobs away from the US citizens, but instead created their own jobs and taken jobs from other immigrants for that matter, right? We've seen that they've not been hurtful for any of that matter for the other US citizens, right? So as a result, we see there's no direct negative impact on the US citizens directly. We see that they'll be able to benefit us much more economically as opposed to harm us economically in any way, right? The third point about the moral responsibility. Now, opening opposition talks here about why we have a responsibility to take them, right? But my partner actually brings out to you this great point about the Pottery Barn principle, right? The fact that we've actually gone into that territory and created this chaos that's present right now. We see that we have the responsibility in order to help them better their lives, or in order to take them and to ensure that we fix their lives in some way, right? Because this thing is not just about countering ISIS narrative, right? It's also about countering the fact that the US is considered as an Islamophobic state, right? It's the fact that ISIS does not want refugees to come in is the fact that's the IS narrative that's going place, right? By taking in these Syrian refugees, we'll actually be able to counter this IS narrative that's going there, and as a result, not only help them, but also, in a way, fight against ISIS and fulfill our moral responsibility. And for these reasons, Mr. Speaker, I urge you to go with sad opposition.
Thank you very much. So, normally they would cross the house and shake hands, but we'll skip that. They hate their guts. Let's start with Austin's speech and offer some feedback. Comments on Austin's speech.
Absolutely.
You have some matter at Austin's speech. Go for it, please.
Yeah, so I just found some cool things when I was actually prepping for your case, because I thought that was you guys, that I'm going to give to you later, but specifically, when you look at the cost analysis, the fact that we spent like $1.5 billion on refugees that we accepted last year, and we only accepted like 2,200. So if you average that out, it's like almost $700,000 per person. And it gives, like, I'll show you the website where I got it, because it gives like a breakdown of like medical care and like transportation, all that stuff. So that's super useful.
Yeah, that's good. Well, a similar thing is there were a couple of articles put up on the web that talked about disproportional impact on social welfare in certain areas. If you want to argue it, go.
I don't know if this is helpful, but like there were a few high-ups that said that there would be an attack. So I'm curious, just for my own personal, why you guys didn't find that useful information.
What? I missed what she said. What?
There's a couple people who have said we're susceptible to attacks. We kind of just ran out of time.
Yeah.
I was just curious.
I get like half of my speech. Yeah, that was not bad.
Yeah, and as I said, I think that the vetting thing can get cut way down.
Yeah, I actually just redid my own. Okay, so I'll give it after.
More for Austin, please. Yes, on his constructive. Yes.
Okay, so
Name.
Harsh.
Hi, Harsh.
So with your second point where you talk about how radical politicians will get more basically airtime because the Syrian refugees coming in, I feel that could be easily disproved by the opposition because they already argue that USA isn't Europe, and simply because USA has a bi-party system, that is kind of redundant. also the fact that how is this a bad thing? Like, you
That's
know,
not fair at all.
No.
Yeah, I'd actually say we're at more risk than.
Yeah, we're way worse.
Nations
We already started way more conservative than Europe is. Europe
Yeah.
is notoriously
yeah, but how is that a bad thing for the country?
What?
the rise of fascist parties.
No, not
I mean,
like how the rise of conservatism.
no,
Like,
it's rise of fascism.
but that can't happen in the United States because of the bi-party system.
Yes, it can.
But his point was
There's
this.
a biparty
is this a
system
bad
everywhere. Like all these countries have biparty systems.
Yeah.
No.
Yeah.
Germany and Netherlands, they have multiple parties.
Yeah, that's different. Multi-party system, you
Well,
can have.
USA technically has multiple party systems as well. There's no one gets enough support except for Republicans and Democrats.
One other thing that, where did you go? Oh, you have to go, you have to study?
Yeah, I'm exempt.
What a tragedy. Okay. Oh, I wish you could contribute to the discussion. But one other point that you guys raised about the whole notion about the public opinion being against it. 30 governors signed a petition saying, please don't send them to our state. So there's a question of the populist democracy and the people feeling that the federal government is just giving them the middle finger. Continues to breed that discontent. Other stuff for Austin? Yeah.
Austin, you began
Name?
with, hi, I'm Insia.
Hi, Ancia.
You began with the social contract theory where you said that, you are in a country and, whatever, and then they have an obligation to you.
Sure.
But the thing is that the social contract theory actually can very easily just go against your case. Like, they could have just said that social contract theory is also when we live in a country, there is a certain level of risk we accept for everything that happens. This is literally what social contract theory has. That when you are living in a country and it's providing you, safety or whatever,
Right.
you are inherently accepting some amounts of risk living in that
But
country.
the job of the country is to minimize the risk.
So yes, but you also
Like they can't do something to raise this because it's still acceptable margin.
No. Listen to me. So when you are accepting a minimal amount of risk that comes with it, and then they show to you how the risk, the cause of the vetting process is minimal, and you have all these statements where they're like, it's almost risk-free and you haven't seen cases of any actual terrorist behaviors, then your entire social contract theory is just as harmful to your case as it is
Not really, because social contract theory, it doesn't matter if we're helping Syrians for social contract theory.
No.
It doesn't matter at all. There's no, okay, let me explain. There's literally, for social contract theory-wise, there's no benefit to Americans to bringing in Syrian refugees, right?
No, that's not what I'm saying. I'm saying that the social contract theory says that you accept some amounts of risk when you are in a
That's implicit in social contract theory, but that's not what it says. What social contract theory says is that the primary obligation of a state is to help the people because there's give and take with the state.
One thing I would comment on, Austin, that I think I'll take from Vidya's point is that you didn't do a hell of a lot with social contract theory besides mentioning it once. And you didn't get a lot of. I know you didn't get a lot of mileage out of it. There was fancy window dressing that was.
Well, I mean, it was just a value weighing mechanism. Didn't think it was really part of the argument.
But I didn't see that weighing mechanism used. Anybody else for Austin's case?
I just think I don't know if it's this is maybe wrong, but Austin put the weighing mechanism as assessing the risk to U.S. citizens, but I felt in the back half it became more debate more focused on what is better for the Syrian refugees.
Right.
So is that a point which maybe?
Because his partner brought up that it's better for the refugees.
Right.
Well, no, the way we did this was that we should primarily look at Americans and then secondarily look at Syrians. So that's why my speech was about better for Americans. Her speech was better.
They're trying to have it both ways. They want to protect Americans and the Syrians.
But no, technically, we kind of
from
got cut out of the debate because everyone just kind of rejected our weighing mechanism.
Yeah, exactly.
Which is that happened.
Yeah.
Technically should have gone with it, but they cut us out, so that's fair.
Do you have any comment for the first opening government speech? You too? Any comments for the opening government speech? Yeah.
I would say, I like the alternative, let's get humanitarian aid, right? It helps more people and for cheaper, but maybe just a little bit more on how you do it, because that was kind of vague. So we can say it goes to Assad and he uses it to terrorize people.
Yeah.
Where is that 30% a real number?
What?
30% of aid actually gets to people? That's way higher than I thought.
That's all. That's the average for African.
That's Africa and the Middle East.
Yeah.
Cool. So that's really long.
Okay. One comment I would make to you, Austin, is that I would suggest you instead of saying you're sending it to Syria, sending it to Jordan and to Europe and to a lot of places. Because that's what that consortium of that European consortium is trying to do, is to spread the aid out not only to Jordan and to Turkey, where they're using them as staging areas, but other places in Europe to help smooth it out.
Right. Well, they rejected it in those areas usually.
Anything else for Austin? Economic benefits, vetting process. I didn't think they didn't contest. They just said it's good enough, and they challenged you on show me one Syrian or one Iraqi that's spit on the sidewalk, and you won the debate, and you couldn't.
Yeah.
So
the vetting process failed.
I'd say that was on a visa, not refugee.
And I think to Austin, I think to a crowd though, I think that is telling, and I think there is a lot of stuff on.
Oh, we haven't taken it enough. I don't see how that's.
No, there is a lot of stuff on trouble we've had with Iraqi refugees
and Somali refugees.
Somali,
yeah,
tons.
Yeah. That was my other thing. Is like y'all should bring.
No,
I know it's in your case.
The shooting in Texas.
Yeah, it's a unique situation.
Okay. The other thing, and it's going to be a little controversial to say, but the Parisian shooters had Syrian passports. Okay.
Well, I kind of referenced that it was caused by the lack of SIGIN. I didn't specifically say that.
Okay.
They want to be like that,
You want to draw that link?
I just kind of wanted to imply that, but not use the quote, and not specifically say they were Syrian refugees.
So I said better to send to Jordan and Turkey and to all of Europe. You got that comment, and yeah, okay.
I'll give you my sketch.
Okay, so for the Madeline's speech, what's your comments? Yes, please.
Yeah, don't ever bring up indentured labor as a good economic benefit.
Yeah, I agree. And what's wrong with that, Varun? I'm just playing devil's advocate
You just
here.
contradict yourself and be like, yeah, what we really want to do is help the Syrian refugees. So we're going to bring them here and then push them down to the white people.
It's just the narrative, we didn't take the manual labor jobs anyway, so I'm trying to show why that was.
But then your point with like entrepreneurship, like better farm workers, or like.
I kind of was curious even though that is the case, that's probably better than what their other option was, and so I was shocked you didn't bring that up. Like, I would have spun it as, well, we'll give them a better life, not we'll give them the worst life here in America.
No, I should have said that.
Yeah, exactly.
But yeah.
So just.
And I thought that it contradicted a little your Einstein examples. With you immediately went after Einstein and these great people. Good night. Bye.
First of all, was Einstein really that productive a member of society?
Yeah.
Did he contribute economically at all?
Maybe at par. Also, I would say though, if you bring up the economic argument at all, I can just use
Okay, any other comments for Madeline's arguments? Any more comments for her? Madeline, any more comments for her refutation, her overall approach?
There wasn't a lot of refutation.
Yeah,
I don't know if that was on. Yeah, there was
Yeah.
you only refuted one point, was the Islamophobia through strict vetting process.
Right. Was that by choice, or you didn't have enough to say, or you didn't want to do the?
But the Europe example was in my refutation.
So you were kind of incorporate. What I'm saying is, for some judges that gets confusing, and for some judges it's a lot simpler to do a short refutation and beat the shit out of their points, and then do your new matter. For a lot of simpletons, it is clearer. Americans have better lives. Anything else for Madeline? Let's say. Yeah, her challenge of showing me one Syrian that's blowing. You got all that. Okay, good. Anything else for Madeline? One thing, by the way, that I think you should research if you haven't already, and this goes to that comment I was making to you about USC and the Comic-Con debacle, was that this House opposes the acceptance of Syrian refugees into the United States. There are people in the Obama administration, including Senator Kerry, who's talking about going way past 10,800. He's talking about...
Before Brexit to make it 10,800.
What?
Literally just told me before I came in here to make it 10,800.
No, I'm talking to you about, they're saying it's wonderful we're keeping it at that, and you're saying we're not going to keep it at that. That's why we're opposed to the acceptance of it, because there's politicians that are chomping at the bit to go way past 10,800. Kerry just proposed 75,000 a year.
That was the number we were preparing to defend.
Yeah, Kerry just proposed 75,000. Another politician said, I think we could safely take 200,000 a year. You need to have those stats because there are people chomping at the bit to take in crowds, not little clusters, as Madeline liked to put it. We cluster around the U.S. Very, very sweet way, you know. They're all very harmless that way, right? Yeah. Okay, anything else for Madeline? Yeah, okay. Madeline, what did you think of your speech?
I thought it was okay, considering me and Jared actually prepped for your side.
Yeah. Okay. Let's talk to about her then for a few minutes. Anybody have any comments for Austin's fair half?
I thought you refuted.
Okay. How did you do?
I thought you did really well in refutation. Like you refuted all of her points.
Yeah.
And you did it really well. And then, but I am curious as to why. Okay, so Austin did the U.S. citizens at risk and not an effective fix, and then you did harms to U.S. and harms to refugees. So there wasn't any like continuity between the two speeches. I didn't think. Maybe I didn't know if that was on purpose or.
Yeah, that's a good point. And what were you going to say to it?
One, because I had to rearrange my ideas, which I couldn't really do in time. Also, I feel like he was taking it from the harms and benefits to the U.S. angle, and I was taking it from what happens to the Syrian refugees.
And Austin, you notice at the end of his speech, and you find yourself, folks, when you're running out of time and you're not covering your whole thing, say, my partner is going to deal with the harms that are going to come to the actual immigrants in her speech. So it doesn't look like you planned it.
Right.
You didn't run out of time, and that was coming. So, but he had a good section in his speech, but he didn't present it. Yes.
I have a question. So when we say refugees, do we mean like taking someone from Syria, bringing them to the U.S., and when everything hypothetically becomes stable in Syria, sending them back to Syria?
Yeah.
Or they can come here and stay forever?
That's hypothetically what a refugee is, but pretty much most of the time they just stay here.
Yeah. And in the case of the Cuban and in the case of the Vietnamese, they were ultimately all transformed into citizens. They were allowed to apply for citizenship and went through citizenship training and were granted citizenship.
Yeah, but technically, refugee is for just interim safety.
Yeah, why they can prove the
but
threat to them.
it's not going to happen, especially since Syria is not getting better for a long, long time.
Yeah. One other thing, just to get a little bit ahead of the story that you guys need to know, or hopefully the Chinese team will know, is when the Vietnamese were taken out of Vietnam, they did not come immediately to America. So do a little research there. They were staged in Hong Kong and in China and other places, and they were brought in very gradually and spread about and so forth. The other thing that's different, that's not analogous for Joe's historical analogy, is none of those people, well, maybe the Cubans, few of the Cubans, but none of those people, wanted to not accept American values of, rights for women and, rights for gays and that sort of thing. Okay, anything else for Vidya? Are we good? What you should have noticed with Vidya's speech was I thought you were just a touch long on refutation and a little touch short on your new matter, but you got to it, and I thought it was pretty good. I think that, I think if you do a little research on the Iraqi refugees, you'll find some stuff. Also, one other area. Okay, yes.
Also, one thing is in case what Austin explained, since one of you is going to take risk to U.S. citizens and other one's going to take benefits to Syrian refugees, signpost that better, because I felt I got a little confused. You can just say, my partner first took over how it's more risky to U.S. citizens, and I will now elaborate on how Syrians are better off. Because I got a little confused with that.
Okay, let's talk about Jared. I was going to, I was just going to say, let's talk about Jared. What feedback do you have for Jared?
Yeah, I thought it was. Yeah.
I thought he wiped the floor with this speech.
He wiped the floor. Okay.
Okay. One of the most things, because as someone who is not very well versed in this subject, when I heard and me just naturally being for Syrian refugees being admitted, when I heard Austin's argument, well, it costs $200,000 per person to vet them, and it's better to be spent on food aid. I was like, oh, that's a point I haven't considered. But then Jared just destroyed that argument by saying even if that was the case, there's no actual institutions that could do that, and so that point is completely moot. Not just that, but just the whole general aura of your speech.
Okay. Wait a minute. Austin, did you hear? Charlie had some good comments. He felt that Jared wiped the floor with you, and it would be worth watching his speech to see how he felt he did it. But in one thing in particular was, that big argument over the numbers. So.
I have a question for you, though.
Yeah.
How did you feel about me stating the points of refutation I had before I delivered them? Is that, as a judge, more clear for you, or
for me it was, okay. Yes. How did I feel about your Trump rudeness and your shut up and sit down? Way over the top and bad. I was really alienated from you, and to the point where Charlie's going, oh yeah, he's my hero. I'm sitting there saying, this guy's a jerk. I'm not going to listen to him. So you got to be careful about, and you're going to see on some of the, if you watch any of the tapes, you're going to see some of the. This happens a little more at Worlds than it does at the national tournaments, but you will see some debaters say, "Sit down," and they say it real vehemently, but they don't say it repeatedly, and they don't say, "If you stand up again, I'll shoot your head off," or whatever you said, or "I won't take anything from you." That was way over the top. Yes.
Yeah, I like the energy, but I think that coming after Vidya's speech, it was kind of unjustified.
Yeah.
To have passion is good, but considering how calm she is and the way that she delivers it, you really stand out as what the hell is going on? That's
I was totally right with the numbers. You gave me the numbers, then you called them wrong.
Wait, what?
The analysis I gave for the numbers, you gave me that number would actually go to people, and then you say no, that number won't even go to the people.
No, that's not what I said.
Okay, Sally explained it.
It doesn't really matter. It's completely.
Also, when you said that we have no institution to give it within Syria, we could just spend the money building those things, kind of gaining access. And
I don't buy it.
You don't need help now.
I didn't.
Yeah, no. You know what I mean? Just increasing access and seeing.
I mean, you can actually wait.
Tell me what the infrastructure is.
You could make the argument that this is the best time to do it because with Russia involved.
Ceasefire,
yeah, okay. I'd buy the ceasefire.
Yeah.
With Russia being involved now, it's a good time. No, but you gave us the number at 30%.
No, but what I said was that they're now dependent on the people who will get it. because they won't directly get it.
But remember, Austin, this is dependent upon you stressing most of it going to Syria, and I recommend you not do that you spread it out over Turkey, Jordan, and Europe. Because Turkey is just a whole.
A good argument for you guys might actually be like not give it directly to Syria since they've proven to be a corrupt government, but give it to the government surrounding.
Oh,
do you know what I mean? Like,
yeah, like Turkey.
Right.
Well, yeah.
Here's a new hand we haven't heard from all night. Yeah. Hi. Name? What's your name?
I'm Kaylin.
Hi, Kaylin. Not to be confused with Caitlin. Kaylin. Okay.
Well, gosh, now I've lost my thoughts. We're good.
Okay, well, we'll come back to you. Yes, sir.
So, I feel that...
Name?
My name's Rami.
Hi, Rami.
Alright, I feel that one point that Jared made completely debunked. Like, he completely destroyed this debate, this contention throughout the debate round, was the idea that Syrian refugees in the US will be much better off than Syrian refugees in Syria. Because he was all like,
that's not what the debate was. That's not, no, it's completely like an external factor. Like, no shit, they're going to be worse off. Like, we don't need to say they're going to be better off here.
Wait a minute. Say your point again. Why did you feel that destroyed?
Because he clearly stated alright, so Syrians are drowning to come to the U.S. 400 people already drowned to go to come to these developed nations.
Right.
So any harms that could come to Syrian refugees in these developed nations, including Islamophobic attacks, including any of those potential attacks, are completely mitigated by the fact that Syrians are threatened to be blown to smithereens.
No, but his answer, you want to give it?
I'll say, Oscar Wilde said that just because men die for something does not inherently make it true. Okay, and it's not first of all
That's the better answer that he was trying to give is the bad news is those boats are going out in the Mediterranean. Whether we have 10,000 or 100,000 coming in, those boats are going out in the Mediterranean for the next 2-3 years. Count on it. And regardless of what we do.
So, like I said, right, it's on their side to prove that there's unique benefit coming to the U.S. specifically, and if they don't prove that, then
you guys should definitely come both. There should be a model through which you can compare.
Yeah. Also, I feel like a lot of time was spent saying that there going to be harm to Syrian refugees if they come to the U.S. There was time spent on that debate.
Yeah.
And after Jared's speech, there shouldn't have been time spent on it.
Okay, well, let Vidya then try to explain what she was saying to you.
Yeah, they're not solving their harm. Their harm is that people are dying coming here, that they need help and things like that, right? And all we had to say was that their model doesn't.
Are people going to stop coming here because we take in 10,000 refugees?
Yeah.
Right, but that's just a mitigation response.
Venice Beach is leaving.
No, here's how many people are coming over? He gave a number 40,000 people died, right? And, on the boat. We're only taking in 10.
400.
Okay, your hand went up. Do you remember what you said? What you thought? Give her a chance. Yeah.
Okay, Austin, when you said that these, taking those 10,000 refugees will not prevent those 400 people from dying, but his point, I think, about saying that those 400 people died was not that would change anything, but that just brings into light the situation there, that they would choose to die in an attempt to get out of there than die just staying there. So your arguments about, just listen to me, your argument about how them coming here is going to be bad for them, doesn't at all even come to terms with that their situation is already so bad that anything that they might face over here doesn't matter.
No, here's the thing, okay? Here's the thing, it's not about us saying whether it's going to be better, okay? What we're trying to show is why it's specifically better to come to the United States than to just stay where they are, right?
But then they try to show that it's better for the refugees.
Okay. This debate, they're not taking rafts to America. They're taking rafts to other places, and then we're letting them into America. So the thing is, yeah, we're all saying life fucking sucks if you're in Syria right now. And yeah, you're going to probably die.
Well, it's
yeah,
not...
Let me finish.
Yeah.
Come on, okay? So the thing is, we have to show why it's going to be specifically better for them to come to the United States than to stay in Europe, to stay in Turkey, or to stay in Jordan, right? And the issue is, if there is like significant Islamophobia here, where they are going to be mistreated, then there's really no point for them to come here specifically, because there's no unique benefit to being here. So it doesn't really matter if like they're dying, because yeah, life is obviously worse in Syria. But why is America specifically better than any other actor?
Okay, we have a new hand from a new voice. Yay.
I think maybe this is just my opinion, and I'm not very familiar with debates, so I could be totally wrong. But
Doesn't mean you're a bad person.
I think maybe explicitly addressing the fact that life in Syria, these people are in danger and at risk. You can explicitly address that fact, but just say the amount of people we're letting in is so insignificant. I know you tried to do that implicitly,
right.
but people are upset by the fact that you didn't address it because it was so implicit. So I think maybe addressing it explicitly might help your argument. I could be totally wrong.
Yeah. Well, I think they're going to go another way. I hope they go another way and point out that there's other politicians that want to let in 100,000, or Secretary Kerry wants to let in 75,000 a year. Did you have something to add?
Yeah, it was just about the argument that, they've been talking about the government aid plan as that was the fundamental support of their argument of it's a better economic. But I felt even though it was attacked on the other side, I felt there was no strong economic argument made by any one person. It was touched on by a few different people, but it never really came into formation because I thought the infrastructure and distribution is
Okay, Austin, this is a good point. She points out that your aid specificity and distribution specificity was kind of vague and it wasn't picked up by the back half and could be stronger with you and Vidya both making it more apparent. I saw this hand as new.
Do I say my name again?
Sure.
So I think one thing you could reinforce on is how right now you mentioned the fact that how is USA unique as a site for refugees as opposed to Europe or Turkey or Jordan or anywhere else. I think that's something you could possibly emphasize on, because when this entire debate is going on, you're thinking of getting people out of Syria. And like you said, people are dying in Syria. That's just how it's going to be. So I think we emphasize about how U.S. has necessarily to be better than Europe, because you can emphasize the fact that refugees are not dying in Europe. They're living in slightly worse off situations, but they're not dying, so they have the entire moral obligation of people dying, they're being bombed into 500 pieces, or whatever it is. That's not happening to them in Europe, so we're not mitigating that downside that they're facing.
Good point. Okay.
Just to get back on Jared over there.
Jared,
I don't know if you spent a lot of time on refutation, maybe I missed it. You refuted their arguments, but it wasn't clear that you were refuting specific points they made. Maybe I missed it. I don't know.
Okay, well, Jared, the solution to that, if she missed it, is to do it a little bit more overtly. They said, I disagree because, therefore, you should accept Syrian refugees,
But I really like
it. Let's talk about Joe and Pratik, and of course, Varun. So let's go to, I guess it's, yeah.
I just want to make a quick point for them. When it comes to refugees on rafts and whatnot, not only is it not unique, right, that even if they come to the U.S. they're not solving harms, but I think you could have made the point that just incentivizes more people to get on these rickety rafts and drown their families because they think that there's some false promise of getting to the United States, which isn't going to happen.
Yeah, Austin, you should hear this. Yeah. That's a great point. He said, flip my argument about all these people on rafts and saying, yes, and more will get on the rafts with false hope if we suddenly start doing this in any significant
that's
degree.
also a complete mischaracterization. We don't take anyone from Europe already. The refugees we take in are in Syria.
Yeah.
The UN High Commission, they only take people from Syria, and that's where they sign up for their the SRC. Yeah. So no one on rafts is going to come to America.
Okay, but maybe the argument is the refugees don't know that. Once they hear that the U.S. is
they definitely know that.
Yeah.
I think that.
What, the refugees don't like jump on like, oh shit, I have to go back.
By the way, how did you respond to the article I put up saying that Europe was worried about what's going to happen after the winter when they're bearing down for a new big flood to come in, and some are dealing it with barbed wire, some are dealing it with machine guns, others just don't know how to deal with it. Others are saying, keep them all in Greece. So, okay, Joe and Pratik, can we give them some feedback? And Varun? Okay. No, I guess not. I guess you guys were just perfect.
That's not true.
Okay, Austin, do you want to say something about Joe? And I want to say something about Joe, but...
No, it was solid. Yeah, that's what I need to go for it.
I like the way you moved your arguments around from the way you argued them before. Mm-hmm. I like that. Be careful about using vocabulary that's not, that's in the gender studies, but may not be. May not be.
Any words in particular?
Narrative.
What?
The narrative.
Narrative?
Oh, the narrative.
The narrative, like the ISIS narrative. It's kind of like liberal jargon, but I don't think it's that bad.
It wasn't that bad, but just a few little things.
Narrative, it kind of is.
I wrote down a couple things.
What?
To lure people in.
No, it's like true. No, just the specific term, like the ISIS narrative. It's kind of like a
Dias.
Oh, that was good, man. Respect.
Okay, you
I like that.
The only thing that I was.
Does everyone know what it means?
Let me clarify. I did that in debates too. Yeah. Okay. I think that's good.
Okay,
the only thing that was
clarify. Go ahead.
The only thing that was a little confusing, just writing it down, is you gave the 3 points as historical analysis, ISIS, and then principal argument, and then you flipped it a little. That was just a little confusing. Just a small. So I was like, oh no, he forgot a point, and then he went.
I also like Joe's saying, hey, we're not saying it was Obama or George Bush. That was very effective.
Yeah.
I thought just